Today I'm going to be reading Wicked, The Life and Times of the Wicked Witch of the West by Gregory Maguire. And one of the things that I love about his books are you have this little window and it shows you one scene, the scene that you're very familiar with. And that scene is the Wicked Witch. But when you open the cover, it shows you more behind the story, where she is caring for these animals. She seems kind and almost sad. And that's one of the things that I really like about this story, is that it shows you a different perspective. I also want to show you the map, because that will be important later in remembering where everything is. Okay. Prologue on the yellow brick road. A mile above Oz, the witch balanced on the wind's forward edge, as if she were a green fleck of the land itself, flung up and sent wheeling away by the turbulent air. White and purple summer thunderheads mounded around behind her. Below, the yellow brick road looped back on itself like a relaxed noose. Though winter storms and the crowbars of agitators had torn up the road, still it led relentlessly to the Emerald City. The witch could see the companions trudging along, maneuvering around the buckled sections, skirting trenches, skipping when the way was clear. They seemed oblivious of their fate, but it was not up to the witch to enlighten them. She used the broom as a sort of balustrade, stepping down from the sky like one of her flying monkeys. She finished up on the topmost bough of a black willow tree. Beneath, hidden by the fronds, her prey had paused to take their rest. The witch tucked her broom under her arm. Crab-like and quiet, she scuttled down a little at a time, until she was a mere 20 feet above them. Wind moved the dangling tendrils of the tree. The witch stared and listened. There were 4 of them. She could see a huge cat of some sort. A lion, was it? And a shiny woodman. The Tin Woodman was picking nits out of the lion's mane, and the lion was muttering and squirming from the aggravation. An animated scarecrow lolled nearby, blowing dandelion heads into the wind. The girl was out of sight behind shifting curtains of the willow. Of course, to hear them tell it, it is the surviving sister who is the crazy one, said the lion. What a witch, psychologically warped, possessed by demons, insane. Not a pretty picture. She was castrated at birth, replied the Tin Woodman calmly. She was born hermaphroditic, or maybe entirely male. "Oh, you see castration everywhere you look," said the Lion. "I'm only repeating what folks say," said the Tin Woodman. "Everyone is entitled to an opinion," said the Lion airily. "She was deprived of a mother's love, is how I've heard it. She was an abused child. She was addicted to medicine for her skin condition." "She has been unlikely in love," said the Tin Woodman, "like the rest of us." The Tin Woodman paused and placed his hand on the center of his chest, as if in grief. "She is a woman who prefers the company of other women," said the Scarecrow, sitting up. "She is the spurned lover of a married man. She is a married man." The witch was so stunned that she nearly lost her grip on the branch. The last thing she ever cared for was gossip, yet she had been out of touch for so long that she was astonished at the vigorous opinions of these random nobodies. "She's a despot, a dangerous tyrant," said the Lion with conviction. The Tin Woodman pulled harder than was necessary on a lock of mane. "Everything's dangerous to you, you craven thing. I hear she's a champion of home rule for the so-called Winkies. Whoever she is, she must surely be grieving the death of her sister," said the child, in a somber voice too rich, too sincere for one so young. The witch's skin crawled. "Don't go feeling sympathetic now. I certainly can't," the Tin Woodman sniffed, a bit cynically. "But Dorothy's right," said the Scarecrow. "No one is exempt from grief." The witch was deeply irked by their patronizing speculations. She moved around the trunk of the tree, stretching to catch a glimpse of the child. The wind was picking up, and the Scarecrow shivered. While the Tin Woodman continued fussing over the Lion's tresses, he leaned against the Lion, who held him tenderly. "Storm on the horizon," said the Scarecrow. Miles off, thunder echoed. "There is a witch on the horizon," said the Tin Woodman, tickling the Lion. The Lion got spooked and rolled on top of the Scarecrow, whimpering, and the Tin Woodman collapsed on top of them both. "Good friends, should we be wary of that storm?" said the girl. The rising winds moved the curtain of greenery at last, and the witch caught sight of the girl. She was sitting with her feet tucked underneath her and her arms wrapped around her knees. She was not a dainty thing, but a good-sized farm girl, dressed in blue and white checks and a pinafore. In her lap, a vile little dog cowered and whined. "The storm makes you skittish. It's natural after what you've been through," said the Tin Woodman. "Relax." The witch's fingers dug into the bark of the tree. She still could not see the girl's face, just her strong forearms and the crown of her head, where her dark hair was pulled back into pigtails. Was she to be taken seriously, or was she merely a blow-away dandelion seed caught on the wrong side of the wind? If she could see the girl's face, the witch felt she might know. But as the witch craned outward from the trunk, the girl at the same time twisted her face, turning away. "The storm is coming closer, and in a hurry." The feeling in her voice rose as the wind rose. She had a throaty vehemence, like someone arguing through the threat of impending tears. I know storms. I know how they come upon you. We're safer here, said the Tin Woodman. Certainly we are not, answered the girl, because this tree is the highest point around, and if lightning is to strike, it will strike here. She clutched her dog. Didn't we see a shed further up the road? Come, come, Scarecrow. If there's lightning, you'll burn the fastest. Come on. She was up and running in an ungainly way, and her companions followed in a mounting panic. As the first hard drops of rain fell, the witch caught sight not of the girl's face, but of the shoes. Her sister's shoes. They sparkled even in the darkening afternoon. They sparkled like yellow diamonds and embers of blood and thorny stars. If she had seen the shoes first, the witch would never have been able to listen to the girl or her friends. But the girl's legs had been tucked beneath her skirt. Now the witch was reminded of her need. The shoes should be hers. Hadn't she endured enough? Hadn't she earned them? The witch would fall on the girl from the sky and wrestle those shoes off her impertinent feet if only she could. But the storm from which the companions raced farther and faster along the yellow brick road troubled the witch more than it did the girl, who had gone through the rain, and the scarecrow whom lightning could burn. The witch could not venture out in such vicious, insinuating wetness. Instead, she had to tuck herself between some exposed roots of the black willow tree, where no water could endanger her, and wait for the storm to pass. She would emerge. She always had before. The punishing political climate of Oz had beat her down, dried her up, tossed her away. Like a seedling, she had drifted, apparently too desiccated ever to take root. But surely the curse was on the land of Oz, not on her. Though Oz had given her a twisted life, hadn't it also made her capable? No matter that the companions had hurried away, the witch could wait. They would meet again. Munchkinlanders. From the crumpled bed, the wife said, the root of evil. From the crumpled bed, the wife said, I think today's the day. Look how low I've gone. Today? That would be like you, perverse and inconvenient, said her husband, teasing her, standing at the doorway and looking outward over the lake, the fields, the forested slopes beyond. He could just make out the chimneys of rush margins, breakfast fires smoking. The worst possible moment for my ministry, naturally. The wife yawned. There's not a lot of choice involved, from what I hear. Your body gets this big and it takes over. If you can't accommodate it, sweetheart, you just get out of its way. It's on a track of its own, and nothing stops it now. She pushed herself up, trying to see over the rise of her belly. I feel like a hostage to myself, or to the baby. Exert some self-control. He came to her side and helped her sit up. Think of it as a spiritual exercise, custody of the senses, bodily as well as ethical continence. Self-control, she laughed, inching towards the edge of the bed. I have no self left. I'm only a host for the parasite. Where's my self, anyway? Where'd I leave that tired old thing? Think of me. His tone had changed. He meant this. Frex. She headed him off. When the volcano's ready, there's no priest in the world who can pray it quiet. What will my fellow ministers think? They'll get together and say, "Brother Frickspar, did you allow your wife to deliver your first child when you had a community problem to solve? How inconsiderate of you. It shows a lack of authority. You're fired from the position." She was ribbing him now, for there was no one to fire him. The nearest bishop was too distant to pay attention to the particulars of a unionist cleric in the hinterland. "It's such terrible timing." "I do think you bear half the blame for the timing," she said. "I mean, after all, Frex. That's how the thinking goes. But I wonder." "You wonder?" she laughed, her head going far back. The line from her ear to the hollow below her throat reminded Frex of an elegant silver ladle. Even in morning disarray, with a belly like a scow, she was majestically good-looking. Her hair had the bright, lacquered look of wet fallen oak leaves in sunlight. He blamed her for being born to privilege and admired her efforts to overcome it. All the while he loved her too. "You mean you wonder if you're the father?" She grabbed the bedstead. Frex took a hold of her other arm and hauled her half upright. "Or do you question the fatherliness of men in general?" She stood, mammoth, an ambulatory island. Moving out the door at a slug's pace, she laughed at such an idea. He could hear her laughing from the outhouse, even as he began to dress for the day's battle. Frex combed his beard and oiled his scalp. He fastened a clasp of bone and rawhide at the nape of his neck to keep the hair out of his face, because his expressions today had to be readable from a distance. There could be no fuzziness to its meaning. He applied some coal dust to darken his eyebrows, a smear of red wax on his flat cheeks. He shaded his lips. A handsome priest attracted more penitents than a homely one. In the kitchen yard, Melena floated gently, not with the normal gravity of pregnancy, but as if inflated, a huge balloon trailing its strings through the dirt. She carried a skillet in one hand, and a few eggs and the whiskery tips of autumn chives in the other. She sang to herself, but only in short phrases. Frex wasn't meant to hear her. His sober gown buttoned tight to the collar, his sandals strapped on over leggings. Frex took from its hiding place beneath a chest of drawers the report sent to him from his fellow minister over in the village of 3 dead trees. He hid the brown pages within his sash. He had been keeping them from his wife, afraid that she would want to come along, to see the fun if it was amusing, or to suffer the thrill of it if it was terrifying. As Frex breathed deeply, readying his lungs for a day of oratory, Melena dangled a wooden spoon in the skillet and stirred the eggs. The tinkle of cowbells sounded across the lake. She did not listen, or she listened, but to something else, to something inside her. It was sound without melody, like dream music, remembered for its effect, but not for its harmonic distresses and recoveries. She imagined it was the child inside her, humming for happiness. She knew he would be a singing child. Melena heard Frex inside, beginning to extemporize, warming up, calling forth the rolling phrases of his argument, convincing himself again of his righteousness. How did that proverb go? The one that Nanny sing-songed to her years ago in the nursery? Born in the morning, woe without warning. Afternoon child, woeful and wild. Born in the evening, woe ends in grieving. Night baby borning, same as the morning. But she remembered this as a joke fondly. Woe is the natural end of life, yet we go on having babies. No, said Nanny, an echo in Melena's mind, and editorializing as usual. No, no, you pretty little pampered hussy. We don't go on having babies. That's quite apparent. We only have babies when we're young enough not to know how grim life turns out. Once we really get the full measure of it, we're slow learners, we women. We dry up in disgust and sensibly halt production. But men don't dry up, Melena objected. They can father to the death. Ah, but we're slow learners, Nanny countered, but they can't learn at all. Breakfast, said Melena, spooning eggs onto a wooden plate. Her son would not be as dull as most men. She would raise him up to defy the onward progress of woe. It is a time of crisis for our society, recited Frex. For a man who condemned worldly pleasures, he ate with elegance. She loved to watch the arabesque of fingers and two forks. She suspected that beneath his righteous asceticism, he possessed a hidden longing for the easy life. Every day is a great crisis for our society. She was being flip, answering him in the terms men use. Dear thick thing, he didn't hear the irony in her voice. We stand at a crossroads. Idolatry looms, traditional values in jeopardy, truth under siege, and virtue abandoned. He wasn't talking to her so much as practicing his tirade against the coming spectacle of violence and magic. There was a side to Frex that verged on despair. Unlike most men, he was able to channel it to benefit his life's work. With some difficulty, she set herself down on a bench. Whole choruses were singing wordlessly inside her head. Was this common for every labor and delivery? She would have liked to ask the nosy local woman who would come around this afternoon, growling shyly at her condition, but she didn't dare. She couldn't jettison her pretty accent, which they found affected, but she could avoid sounding ignorant about these basic matters. Frex noticed her silence. You're not angry I'm leaving you today? Angry? She raised her eyebrows, as if she had never encountered the concept before. History crawls along the peg legs of small individual lives, said Frex, and at the same time, larger eternal forces converge. You can't attend to both areas at once. Our child may not have a small life. Now isn't the time to argue. Do you want to distract me from holy work today? We're facing the presence of real evil in rush margins. I couldn't live with myself if I ignored it. He meant this, and for such intensity she had fallen in love with him, but she hated him for it too, of course. Threats come. They'll come again. Her last word on the subject. Your son will only be born once, and if this watery upheaval inside is any indication, I think it's today. There will be other children. She turned away so he could not see the rage in her face. But she couldn't sustain the fury at him. Perhaps this was her mortal failing. She wasn't much given to worrying about mortal failings as a rule. Having a minister as a husband seemed to stir enough religious thought for one couple. She lapsed sullenly into silence. Frex nibbled at his meal. "It's the devil," said Frex, sighing. "The devil is coming. Don't say a thing like that on a day our child is expected." "I mean the temptation in rush margins, and you know what I mean, Melena." "Words are words, and what's said is said," she answered. "I don't require all of your attention, Frex, but I do need some of it." She dropped the skillet with a crash on the bench that stood against the cottage wall. "Well, and likewise," he said, "what do you think I'm up against today? How can I convince my flock to turn away from the razzle-dazzle spectacle of idolatry? I will probably come back tonight having lost to a smarter attraction. You might achieve a child today. I look forward to failure." Still, as he said this, he looked proud. To fail in the cause of a high moral concern was satisfying to him. How could it compare with the flesh, blood, mess, and noise of having a baby? He stood at last to leave. A wind came up over the lake now, smudging the topmost reaches of the columns of kitchen smoke. They looked, thought Melena, like funnels of water swirling down drains in narrow, focusing spirals. "Be well, my love," said Frex, although he had his stern public expression on, from forehead to toes. "Yes," Melena sighed. The child punched her deep down, and she had to hurry to the outhouse again. "Be holy, and I'll be thinking of you, my backbone, my breastplate, and also try not to be killed." "The will of the unnamed God," said Frex. "My will too," she said, blasphemously. "Apply your will to that which deserves it," he answered. Now he was the minister, and she the sinner, an arrangement she did not particularly enjoy. "Goodbye," she said, and chose the stink and relief of the outhouse over standing to wave him out of sight as he strode along the road to Rush Margins. The Clock of the Time Dragon. Frex was more concerned for Melena than she knew. He stopped at the first fisherman's hut he saw and spoke with the man at the half-door. Could a woman or two spend the day, and if needed the night with Melena, it would be a kindness. Frex nodded with a wince of gratitude, acknowledging without words that Melena was not a great favorite in these parts. Then, before continuing around the edge of the Ilswater and over to Rush Margins, he stopped at a fallen tree and drew 2 letters from his sash. The writer was a distant cousin of Frex's, also a minister. Weeks earlier, the cousins had spent time and valuable ink on a description of what was being called the Clock of the Time Dragon. Frex prepared himself for the day's holy campaign by rereading about the idol clock. "I write in haste, Brother Frexbar, to catch my impressions before they fade. The clock of the Time Dragon is mounted on a wagon and stands as high as a giraffe. It is nothing more than a tottering, freestanding theater, punched on all 4 sides with alcoves and proscenium arches. On the flat roof is a clockwork dragon, an invention of green-painted leather, silvery claws, ruby-jeweled eyes. Its skin is made of hundreds of overlapping discs of copper, bronze, and iron. Beneath the flexible folds of its scales is an armature controlled by clockwork. The Time Dragon circles on its pedestal, flexes its narrow, leathery wings. They make a sound like bellows, and belches out sulphurous balls of flaming orange stink. Below, featured in the dozens of doorways, windows, and porches, are puppets, marionettes, figurines, creatures of folktale, caricatures of peasants and royalty alike, animals and fairies and saints, our unionist saints, Brother Frexbar, stolen out from underneath us. I get enraged. The figures move on sprockets. They wheel in and out of doorways. They bend at the waist. They dance and dawdle and dally with each other. Who had engendered this time dragon, this fake oracle, this propaganda tool for wickedness that challenged the power of unionism and the unnamed god? The clock's handlers were a dwarf and some narrow-waisted minions who seemed to have only enough brain capacity among them to pass a hat. Who else was benefiting besides the dwarf and his beauty boys? The cousin's second letter had warned that the clock was making its way next to Rush Margins. It had told a more specific story. The entertainment begins with a thrum of strings and a rattle of bones. The crowd pushed close, oohing. Within the lighted window of a stage, we saw a marriage bed with a puppet wife and husband. The husband was asleep and the wife sighed. She made a motion with her carved hands to suggest that her husband was disappointingly small. The audience shrieked with laughter. The puppet wife went to sleep herself. When she was snoring, the puppet husband snaked out of bed. At this point, up above, the dragon turned on its base and pointed its talons into the crowd, indicating, without a doubt, a humble well-digger named Grine, who had been a faithful, if inattentive husband. When the dragon reared back and stretched two fingers in a come-hither gesture, isolating a widow named Letta and her snaggle-toothed maiden daughter. The crowd hushed and fell away from Grine, Letta, and the blushing maid, as if they had suddenly been inflicted with running sores. The dragon rested again, but draped a wing over another archway, which lit up to reveal the puppet husband wandering out in the night. Along came a puppet widow with sprigged hair and high color, dragging along a protesting, flinty-toothed daughter. The widow kissed the puppet husband and pulled off his leather trousers. He was equipped with two full sets of male goods, one in the front and another hanging off the base of his spine. The widow positioned her daughter on the abbreviated prong in the front, and herself took advantage of the more menacing arrangement in the rear. The three puppets bucked and rocked, emitting squeals of glee. When the puppet widow and her daughter were through, they dismounted and kissed the adulterous puppet husband. Then they kneed him simultaneously, fore and aft. He swung on springs and hinges, trying to hold all his wounded parts. The audience roared. Grine, the actual well-digger, sweated drops as big as grapes. Letta pretended to guffaw, but her daughter had already disappeared from shame. Before the evening was out, Grine was set upon by his agitated neighbors and investigated for the grotesque anomaly. Letta was shunned. Her daughter seems to have vanished entirely. We suspect the worst. At least Grine wasn't killed. Yet who can say how our souls have been stamped by witnessing such cruel drama? All souls are hostages to their human envelopes, but souls must decay and suffer at such indignity. Don't you agree? Sometimes it seemed to Frex that every itinerant witch and toothless gibbering seer in Oz, who could perform even the most transparent of spells, had seized on the outback district of Wend Hardings to scratch out a trade. He knew that folks from Rush Margins were humble. Their lives were hard and their hopes few. As the drought dragged on, their traditional Unionist faith was eroding. Frex was aware that the clock of the Time Dragon combined the appeals of ingenuity and magic, and he would have to call on his deepest reserves of religious conviction to overcome it. If his congregation should prove vulnerable to the so-called pleasure faith, succumbing to spectacle and violence, well, what next? He would prevail. He was their minister. He had pulled their teeth and buried their babies and blessed their kitchen pots for years now. He had abased himself in their names. He had wandered with an unkempt beard and a begging bowl from hamlet to hamlet, leaving poor Melena alone in the minister's lodge for weeks at a time. He had sacrificed for them. They couldn't be swayed by this time dragon creature. They owed him. He moved on, shoulders squared, jaws set, stomach in a sour uproar. The sky was brown with flying sand and grit. The wind rushed high over the hills with the sound of a tremulous wail, as if pushing through some fissure of rock on a ridge beyond any Frex could see. The birth of a witch. It was nearly evening by the time Frex had worked up the courage to enter the ramshackle hamlet of Rush Margins. He was in a deep sweat. He hit his heels on the ground and pumped his clenched fists and called out in a hoarse, carrying tone. Hist, O ye of small confidence, gather while ye may, for temptation is abroad to try ye sorely. The words were archaic, even ridiculous, but they worked. Here came the sullen fishermen, dragging their empty nets up from the dock. Here came the subsistence farmers, whose hard scrabble plots had borne little during this dry year. Before he had even begun, they all looked guilty as sin. They followed him to the rickety steps of the canoe repair house. Frex knew that everyone expected this evil clock to arrive at any instant. Gossip was as contagious as the plague. He yelled at them for their thirsty anticipation. Ye are dull as toddlers, reaching their hands to touch the pretty embers. Ye are as if spawn of dragon womb, ready to suck on teats of fire. These were time-worn scriptural imprecations, and they fell a little flat tonight. He was tired and not at his best. Brother Frexbar, said Buffy, the mayor of Rush Margins, could you perhaps tone down your harangue until we get a chance to see what fresh new form temptation might take? You have no mettle to resist new forms, said Frex, spitting. Haven't you been our able teacher these several years? Said Buffy. We've hardly had such a good chance to prove ourselves against sin. We're looking forward to the spiritual test of it all. The fisherman laughed and jeered, and Frex intensified his glower, but at the sound of unfamiliar wheels in the stony ruts of the road, they all turned their heads and fell silent. He had lost their attention before he had gotten started. The clock was being drawn by 4 horses and escorted by the dwarf and his cohort of young thugs. Its broad roof was crowned by the dragon, but what a beast! It looked poised, as if ready to spring, as if indeed invested with life. The skin of the house was decorated in carnival colors, burnished with gold leaf. The fisherman gaped as it drew near. Before the dwarf could announce the time of the performance, before the crowd of youths could draw out their clubs, Frex leaped on the lower step of the thing, a fold-down stage on hinges. Why is this thing called a clock? The only clock face it has is flat, dull, and lost in all that distracting detail. Furthermore, the hands don't move. Look, see for yourselves. They're painted to remain at 1 minute before midnight. All you'll see here is mechanics, my friends. I know this for a fact. You'll see mechanical cornfields growing, moons waxing and waning, a volcano to spew a soft red cloth done up with black and red sequins. With all this tick-tocky business, why not have a pair of circulating arms on the clock face? Why not? I ask you, I'm asking you, yes you, Garnet, and you, Stoy, and you, Peripa. Why no real clock here? They were not listening. Garnet and Stoy and Peripa, nor were the others. They were too busy staring in anticipation. The answer, of course, is that the clock isn't meant to measure earthly time, but the time of the soul, redemption and condemnation time. For the soul, each instant is always a minute short of judgment. 1 minute short of judgment, my friends. If you died in the next 60 seconds, would you want to spend an eternity in the suffocating depths reserved for idolaters? Awful lot of noise in the neighborhood tonight, said someone in the shadows, and the spectators laughed. Above Frex, he whirled to see. From the little door had emerged a small, yapping puppet dog, its hair dark and as tightly curled as Frex's own. The dog bounced on a spring, and the pitch of its chatter was annoyingly high. The laughter grew. Evening fell harder, and it was less easy for Frex to tell who was laughing, who now was shouting for him to move aside so they could see. He wouldn't move, so he was bundled unceremoniously from his perch. The dwarf gave a poetic welcome. All our lives are activity without meaning. We burrow rat-like into life, and we squirm rat-like through it, and rat-like we are flung into our graves at the end. Now and then, why shouldn't we hear a voice of prophecy or see a miracle play? Beneath the apparent sham and indignity of our rat-like lives, a humble pattern and meaning still applies. Come nearer, my good people, and watch what little extra knowledge augurs for your lives. The time dragon sees before and beyond and within the truth of your sorry span of years here. Look at what it shows you. The crowd pushed forward. The moon had risen, its light like the eye of an angry, vengeful god. Give over, let me go, Frex called. It was worse than he had thought. He had never been manhandled by his own congregation. The clock unfolded a story about a publicly pious man with lamb's wool beard and dark curly locks who preached simplicity, poverty, and generosity while keeping a hidden coffer of gold and emeralds in the double-hinged bosom of a weak-chinned daughter of blue blood society. The scoundrel was run through with a long iron stake in a most indelicate way and served up to his hungry flock as roast flank of minister. This panders to your basest instincts, Frex yelled, his arms folded and his face magenta with fury. But now that darkness was almost total, someone came up from behind him to silence him. An arm encircled his neck. He twisted to see which damned parishioner took such liberties, but all the faces were cloaked by hoods. He was kneed in the groin and doubled over, his face in the dirt. A foot kicked him square between the buttocks, and his bowels released. The rest of the crowd, however, was not watching. They were howling with mirth at some other entertainment put on by the clock dragon. A sympathetic woman in a widow's shawl grabbed his arm and led him away. He was too fouled, too much in pain to straighten up and see who it was. "I'll put you down in the root cellar, I will, under a burlap," crooned the good wife, "for they'll be after you tonight with pitchforks, the way that thing is behaving itself. They'll look for you in your lodge, but they won't look in my keeping room." "Melena," he croaked, "they'll find her." "She'll be seen to," said his neighbor. "We women can manage that much, I guess." In the minister's lodge, Melena struggled with consciousness as a pair of midwives went in and out of focus before her. One was a fishwife, the other a palsied crone. They took turns feeling her forehead, peering between her legs, and stealing glances at the few beautiful trinkets and treasures Melena had managed to bring here from Colin grounds. "You chew that paste of pin-labo leaves, ducky, you do that. You'll be unconscious before you know it," said the fishwife. "You'll relax, out will pop the little sweetheart, and all will be well in the morning. Thought you would smell of rosewater and fairy dew, but you stink like the rest of us. Chew on, my ducky, chew on." At the sound of a knock, the crone looked up guiltily from the chest she was kneeling before and rummaging through. She let the lid close with a bang and affected a position of prayer, eyes closed. "Enter," she called. A maiden with tender skin and high color came in. "Oh, I hoped someone would be here," she said. "How is she?" "Nearly out, and so is the babe," answered the fishwife. "An hour more, I reckon." "Well, I'm told to warn you. The men are drunk and on the prowl. They've been riled up by that dragon of the magic clock, you know, and are looking for Frex to kill him." The clock said to. "They'll likely stagger out here. We'd better get the wife safely away. Can she be moved?" "No, I cannot be moved," thought Melena. "And if the peasants find Frex, tell them to kill him good and hard for me, for I never knew a pain so extraordinary that it made me see the blood behind my own eyes. Kill him for doing this to me." At this thought she smiled in a moment of relief and passed out. "Let's leave her here and run for it," said the maiden. "The clock said to kill her too, and the little dragon she's going to give birth to. I don't want to get caught." "We've got our reputations to uphold," said the fishwife. "We can't abandon the fancy lady thing in mid-delivery. I don't care what any clock says." The crone, her head back in the chest, said, "Anyone for some real lace from Gillikin?" "There's a hay cart in the lower field, but let's do it now," said the fishwife. "Come, help me fetch it. You, old mother hag, get your face out of the linens and come dampen this pretty pink brow. Right-o, now we go." A few minutes later, the crone, the wife, and the maiden were trundling the hay cart along a rarely used track through the spindles and bracken of the autumn woods. The wind had picked up. It whistled over the treeless foreheads of the cloth hills. Melena, sprawled in blankets, heaved and moaned in unconscious pain. They heard a drunken mob pass, with pitchforks and torches, and the woman stood silent and terrified, listening to the slurred curses. Then they pressed on with a greater urgency until they came upon a foggy copse, the edge of the graveyard for unconsecrated corpses. Within it, they saw the blurred outlines of the clock. It had been left here for safekeeping by the dwarf. No fool he. He could guess this particular corner of the world was the last place jumpy villagers would seek tonight. "The dwarf and his boykins were drinking in the tavern too," said the maiden breathlessly. "There's no one here to stop us." The crone said, "So you've been peering in the tavern windows at the men, you slut." She pushed open the door in the back of the clock. She found a crawl space. Pendulums hung ominously in the gloom. Huge toothed wheels looked primed to slice any trespasser into sausage rounds. "Come on, drag her in," said the crone. The night of torches and fog gave way, at dawn, to broad bluffs of thundercloud, dancing skeletons of light. Glimpses of the blue sky appeared briefly, though sometimes it rained so hard that it seemed more like mud drops falling than water. The midwives, crawling on hand and knee out the back of the clock wagon, had their little discharge at last. They protected the infant from the dripping gutter. "Look, a rainbow," said the senior, bobbing her head. A sickly scarf of colored light hung in the sky. What they saw, rubbing the caul and blood off the skin, was it just a trick of the light? After all, following the storm, the grass did seem to throb with its own color. The roses zinged and hovered with crazy glory on their stems. But even with these effects of light and atmosphere, the midwives couldn't deny what they saw. Beneath the spit of the mother's fluids, the infant glistened a scandalous shade of pale emerald. There was no wail, no bark of newborn outrage. The child opened its mouth, breathed, and then kept its own counsel. "Wine, you fiend," said the crone. "It's your first job." The baby shirked its obligations. "Another willful boy," said the fishwife, sighing. "Shall we kill it?" "Don't be so nasty to it," said the crone. "It's a girl." "Ha!" said the bleary-eyed maiden. "Look again. There's the weather vane." For a minute they were in disagreement, even with the child naked before them. Only after a second and third rub was it clear that the child was indeed feminine. Perhaps in labor some bit of organic effluvia had become caught and quickly dried in the cloven place. Once toweled, she was observed to be prettily formed, with a long, elegant head, forearms nicely turned out, clever, pinching little buttocks, cunning fingers with scratchy little nails, and an undeniably green cast to the skin. There was a salmon blush in the cheeks and belly, a beige effect around the clenched eyelids, a tawny stripe on the scalp showing the pattern of eventual hair. But the primary effect was vegetable. "Look what we get for our troubles," said the maiden, a little green pat of butter. "Why don't we kill it? You know what people will say." "I think it's rotten," said the fishwife, and checked for the root of a tail, counting fingers and toes. "It smells like dung." "That is dung you're smelling, you idiot. You're squatting in a cow patty pie." "It's sick, it's feeble, that's why the color. Lose it in the puddle, drown the thing. She'll never know. She'll be out for hours in her ladylike faints." They giggled. They cradled the infant in the crook of their arms, passing it around to test it for weight and balance. To kill it was the kindest course of action. The question was how. Then the child yawned, and the fishwife absent-mindedly gave it a finger to nurse on, and the child bit the finger off at the second knuckle. It almost choked on the gush of blood. The digit dropped out of its mouth into the mud like a bobbin. The woman catapulted into action. The fishwife lunged to strangle the girl, and the crone and the maiden flared up in defense. The finger was dug out of the mire and shoved in an apron pocket, possibly to sew back on to the hand that had lost it. "It's a cock," she just realized she didn't have one, screeched the maiden, and fell on the ground laughing. "Oh, beware the stupid boy first tries to please himself with her. She'll snip his young sprout off for a souvenir." The midwives crawled back into the clock and dropped the thing at its mother's breast, afraid to consider mercy murder for fear of what else the baby might bite. "Maybe she'll chop the tit next. That'll bring her drowsy frailness around quick enough," the crone chuckled. "Though what a child that sips blood even before its first suck of a mother's milk." They left a pipkin of water nearby, and under cover of the next squall, they went squelching away, to find their sons and husbands and brothers, and berate and beat them if they were available, or bury them if not. In the shadows, the infant stared overhead at the oiled and regular teeth of the Times clock.